The CIA thought its secrets were safe until Soviet intelligence began dismantling American operations with alarming precision. Assets vanished, safe houses fell, and years of carefully built networks collapsed almost overnight. The pattern was too perfect to be coincidence, too damaging to be mere mistakes. Someone inside the CIA was feeding Moscow everything. And the traitor wasn't just any officer, he was one trusted to protect the nation's most guarded intelligence.
Washington, D.C., 1985. Deep inside the CIA's counterintelligence branch, a senior officer studied a wall of intelligence failures that defied every explanation. In just 3 years, more than a dozen Soviet operations had collapsed with pinpoint precision. Agents arrested, safe houses exposed, communication networks dismantled. The KGB seemed impossibly ahead, anticipating American moves before they were even made. Nothing about the pattern looked random. Someone on the inside was feeding Moscow the CIA's most closely guarded secrets. That realization triggered one of the most relentless mole hunts in American intelligence history, a 5-year pursuit marked by technological breakthroughs, psychological profiling, and a level of internal suspicion that fractured entire departments. What investigators would eventually uncover was not a shadowy outsider, but a man positioned at the center of the very division tasked with protecting America from Soviet penetration. His betrayal would shatter operations built over decades, cost countless lives, and expose the deepest intelligence failure the CIA had ever suffered. His name was Aldrich Ames.
In 1962, while still in college, Ames took a part-time job with the CIA as a records analyst. The position was entry-level, filing documents and managing paperwork, but it provided security clearance and introduced him to CIA culture. After graduation, he was hired full-time and entered the Career Trainee Program, the CIA's pipeline for developing intelligence officers. His performance during training was mediocre. Instructors noted that he was intelligent and articulate, but lacked the discipline and attention to detail required for excellence in intelligence work. His reports were often late, his analysis superficial, his operational planning careless. But he passed, aided by his father's reputation and the CIA's need for Soviet specialists who could speak Russian. Between 1965 and 1967, Ames worked in the CIA's Soviet East European Division, handling low-level administrative tasks. He was assigned to Ankara, Turkey in 1969, his first operational posting. Turkey was a critical location during the Cold War, bordering the Soviet Union and serving as a base for intelligence operations targeting Soviet military installations. Ames was tasked with recruiting Soviet officials, cultivating relationships that might lead to intelligence collection. His performance was poor. He failed to recruit a single significant asset during 3 years in Ankara. His reports were late and lacked depth. He drank excessively, a problem that became known among colleagues. CIA headquarters noted his underperformance but took no significant action. The agency's culture at the time tolerated mediocrity, particularly for officers with family connections. Ames returned to CIA headquarters in 1972 and spent the next decade in various assignments within the Soviet division. He worked on counterintelligence analysis, studying Soviet intelligence operations, and attempting to identify KGB officers operating under diplomatic cover.
He handled agent communication, managing the flow of information between CIA headquarters and Soviet assets operating in hostile territory. His work was competent but never exceptional, the kind of steady mediocrity that organizations overlook because it doesn't cause immediate problems. In 1981, Ames was assigned to the CIA's Mexico City station, a posting that would prove significant. Mexico City was a major hub for Soviet intelligence operations in Latin America. The KGB maintained a large presence under diplomatic cover, recruiting agents and managing operations throughout the region. Ames's assignment was to recruit Soviet intelligence officers, convincing them to betray their country and work for the CIA. During this posting, Ames met his second wife, Rosario Casas Dupuy, a Colombian cultural attaché. Their relationship developed quickly, complicated by the fact that Ames was still married to his first wife. Rosario was young, attractive, and expensive. She enjoyed luxury shopping, fine dining, and a lifestyle far beyond what a mid-level CIA officer could afford. Ames divorced his first wife in 1983 and married Rosario that same year. The marriage created immediate financial pressure. His divorce settlement required substantial payments. Rosario's spending was extravagant. His salary, approximately $60,000 annually, was insufficient for the lifestyle she expected. He began accumulating debt, credit card balances mounting, financial stress becoming constant. In 1983, Ames returned to CIA headquarters and was assigned to the Soviet Counterintelligence branch, responsible for protecting CIA operations from Soviet penetration. The assignment was ironic, given what would follow. He had access to the identities of Soviet officials recruited by the CIA, operational details of intelligence collection programs, and information about technical surveillance capabilities. He knew America's sources and methods for spying on the Soviet Union, the most sensitive intelligence the United States possessed.
By early 1985, Ames's financial situation was desperate. He owed over $40,000 in credit card debt. His wife's spending showed no signs of decreasing. He faced the prospect of bankruptcy, a catastrophe for a CIA officer that would trigger security reviews and likely end his career. He needed money immediately, and in quantities his salary could never provide. In April 1985, Ames made the decision that would define his life and devastate American intelligence. He decided to sell CIA secrets to the Soviet Union. His reasoning was transactional. The Soviets would pay substantial sums for information about American intelligence operations. He had access to that information. The exchange seemed straightforward, no different from any other business transaction, except the commodity was treason and the price would be paid in lives. On April 16, 1985, Ames walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. He identified himself as a CIA officer and offered to provide information in exchange for money. He requested an immediate payment of $50,000 and promised that the information he could provide would be worth far more. His initial offering was devastating. He provided the names of several Soviet officials who were secretly working for the CIA, compromising them immediately. Soviet intelligence officers escorted Ames to a secure room within the embassy, a space swept for electronic surveillance, where sensitive conversations could occur without American intelligence services listening. They questioned him extensively, verifying that he was indeed a CIA officer with access to sensitive information. His answers demonstrated detailed knowledge of CIA operations, organizational structure, and counterintelligence procedures. The Soviets agreed to his terms.
They paid him $50,000 in cash that day, more money than Ames had ever possessed. They scheduled future meetings, established communication protocols, and instructed him on operational security measures to avoid detection. Ames left the embassy with cash and a commitment to regular payments in exchange for continued information. Over the next 2 months, Ames provided the KGB with comprehensive information about CIA operations targeting the Soviet Union. He identified more than 10 CIA assets operating inside Soviet territory, officials who had been recruited at great risk and were providing critical intelligence about Soviet military capabilities, political intentions, and intelligence operations. He disclosed the identities of Soviet officials meeting with CIA case officers in third countries. He revealed technical surveillance programs, communication methods, and operational protocols. The information was catastrophic. Between June and November 1985, the KGB systematically arrested the CIA assets Ames had betrayed. Some were tried publicly, sentenced to execution, and shot. Others disappeared, arrested quietly, and executed in secret. Family members were interrogated, colleagues investigated, and entire intelligence networks rolled up. Within 6 months, the CIA's Soviet operations were devastated. Decades of work, relationships built over years, and intelligence collection capabilities that had taken enormous resources to develop were destroyed. The CIA's Soviet division was effectively blind, unable to collect human intelligence inside the Soviet Union because every significant asset had been compromised.
At CIA headquarters, alarm spread quickly. The pattern was impossible to miss. Multiple unrelated operations had been compromised simultaneously. The arrests followed no logical pattern based on operational security failures or coincidental Soviet counterintelligence success. Someone was providing information to the KGB. The mole hunt began in late 1985, conducted by the CIA's counterintelligence staff with support from the FBI. The challenge was immense. Identifying a mole requires eliminating hundreds of potential suspects while avoiding false accusations that could destroy innocent careers. The investigation focused on identifying who had access to the compromised operations. They compiled lists of CIA officers and support staff with knowledge of the arrested assets. They reviewed communications, travel records, and financial information, searching for anomalies that might indicate espionage activity. Ames was on the suspect list, but not prominently. His access to sensitive information was legitimate given his assignment to the Soviet counterintelligence branch. His performance reviews were mediocre, but showed no red flags suggesting disloyalty. He had no obvious ideological motivation. Soviet sympathizers were rare in the CIA's Soviet division. Most officers held strong anti-communist views, making ideological betrayal unlikely. But investigators failed to notice critical warning signs. Ames' financial situation had improved dramatically in 1985. He paid off substantial debts. He purchased a $540,000 house in Arlington, Virginia, paying cash, an impossibility on his CIA salary. His wife wore expensive jewelry and designer clothes. They took luxury vacations to Europe and South America. The lifestyle far exceeded his known income, but CIA security officers failed to investigate thoroughly. The agency's security review process was inadequate, focused primarily on background checks during initial hiring rather than ongoing financial monitoring.
Officers were not required to explain sudden wealth unless it triggered specific review thresholds. Ames's spending, while extravagant, was not investigated because no formal review was initiated. The mole hunt stalled through 1986 and 1987. Investigators identified dozens of potential suspects but could not narrow the list definitively. The KGB's operational security was excellent. Ames's meetings with Soviet handlers followed protocols designed to avoid surveillance. He used dead drops, leaving documents at prearranged locations rather than meeting face-to-face. When meetings were necessary, they occurred in third countries during legitimate CIA business travel, making surveillance difficult. In 1989, the Cold War began ending. The Berlin Wall fell. Eastern European communist governments collapsed. Mikhail Gorbachev implemented reforms that suggested the Soviet Union was changing fundamentally. But the mole hunt continued. The damage already done required accountability. Soviet assets had been executed. Intelligence capabilities had been destroyed. The CIA needed to identify the traitor, not just for justice, but to understand what had been compromised and to prevent future betrayals. In 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved. The KGB was reorganized, its officers scattered among new Russian intelligence services. The geopolitical situation transformed, but the mole hunt remained active. CIA and FBI investigators continued analyzing the compromises, searching for patterns that would identify the source. The breakthrough came from a defector. In 1992, a Russian intelligence officer provided information to the CIA suggesting that a highly placed American official had been working for Soviet intelligence. The defector could not provide a name, but offered details about the spy's activities, communication methods, and approximate timeline. The information corroborated what investigators already suspected and provided new leads. Investigators revisited the financial records of CIA officers who had access to the compromised operations. This time, they looked more carefully at Aldrich Ames. His unexplained wealth was striking.
The $540,000 house purchase in 1985, the luxury cars, the expensive vacations. His salary was approximately $60,000 annually. His wife had no substantial income. There was no inheritance, no legitimate business income, no explanation for the wealth.
Further investigation revealed that Ames had made large cash deposits into bank accounts, often in amounts just below the $10,000 threshold that triggered automatic reporting to federal authorities. The pattern suggested deliberate structuring to avoid detection. He paid for major purchases in cash, avoiding paper trails that credit cards or checks would create. His financial behavior was consistent with someone receiving substantial unreported income. Surveillance began in 1992. FBI agents monitored Ames's activities, photographed his meetings, and tracked his movements. They observed him making trips to locations consistent with dead drop sites, areas where documents could be left for retrieval by Soviet handlers. They noticed that after certain trips, his financial situation improved, suggesting payment for information. The challenge was gathering evidence sufficient for prosecution. Financial anomalies and suspicious behavior were not enough. Investigators needed proof that Ames was actively engaged in espionage, that he was providing classified information to foreign intelligence services in exchange for payment. In 1993, investigators obtained authorization for electronic surveillance. They placed listening devices in Ames's home and office, monitored his phone calls, and intercepted his communications. They searched his trash, recovering documents that revealed his operational methods. They analyzed his computer, discovering files that contained classified information he had no legitimate reason to possess. The electronic surveillance provided critical evidence. Recorded conversations revealed Ames discussing classified information with his wife, including details about his espionage activities. Computer files contained classified documents he had copied from CIA systems, material he was preparing to provide to Russian intelligence handlers. The evidence demonstrated active espionage, ongoing betrayal that was continuing even after the Soviet Union's collapse. By late 1993, investigators had sufficient evidence for arrest. But they waited, continuing surveillance to identify Ames's Russian handlers and to understand the full scope of his activities. They wanted to catch him in the act of passing information, providing indisputable evidence of espionage.
On February 21, 1994, FBI agents arrested Aldrich Ames and his wife Rosario outside their Arlington home. The arrest was carefully timed, occurring just before Ames was scheduled to travel to Russia for meetings that investigators believed would involve contact with his Russian handlers. Ames was charged with conspiracy to commit espionage and espionage, capital offenses that carried potential death sentences. Evidence seized during the arrest was overwhelming. Agents found classified documents in his home, cash payments totaling thousands of dollars, and communication materials used for contacting Russian intelligence. His computer contained evidence of classified information he had downloaded and prepared for transmission. Financial records documented payments totaling more than $2.7 million from Russian intelligence services over 9 years. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Ames agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a plea bargain that would spare his life and reduce his wife's sentence. His debriefings revealed the full scope of his betrayal. He had compromised more than 100 intelligence operations. He had identified at least 10 CIA assets operating inside the Soviet Union, all of whom were arrested and most of whom were executed. He had provided information about technical surveillance programs, communication methods, and operational protocols that allowed Soviet and Russian intelligence to neutralize American intelligence collection efforts. The damage assessment was staggering. Ames's betrayal was the most devastating intelligence failure in CIA history. The human cost was measured in lives, Soviet officials executed because they chose to help the United States. The operational cost was measured in destroyed intelligence networks, compromised programs, and lost capabilities that took decades to rebuild. The financial cost exceeded billions of dollars when accounting for destroyed operations and resources required to rebuild capabilities. His motivation remained primarily financial.
During debriefings, Ames expressed little ideological commitment to communism or opposition to American policy. He betrayed his country for money, to maintain a lifestyle he could not otherwise afford. The transactional nature of his treason made it particularly disturbing. He was not motivated by principle or conviction, but by greed and narcissism. On April 28, 1994, Aldrich Ames pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and tax evasion. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Rosario Ames pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and tax evasion. She was sentenced to 63 months in prison. Both were required to forfeit all assets purchased with money received from Russian intelligence. Ames is currently incarcerated at the Federal Correctional Institution in Terre Haute, Indiana, serving his life sentence. He will die in prison, a fate he accepted as part of his plea agreement to avoid execution. His cooperation with investigators provided information necessary for understanding the full scope of his betrayal and for implementing security reforms designed to prevent similar compromises. The Ames case prompted comprehensive changes to CIA security procedures. The agency implemented enhanced financial monitoring, requiring officers to explain unexplained wealth and subjecting them to regular financial reviews. Polygraph examinations became more frequent and more rigorous, focusing specifically on unauthorized disclosure of classified information. Access to sensitive information was restricted, implementing need-to-know protocols more strictly and limiting the number of officers with comprehensive knowledge of multiple operations. The CIA also improved coordination with the FBI on counterintelligence investigations. The Ames case revealed that bureaucratic barriers between agencies had delayed the investigation and allowed Ames to continue operating for years after initial suspicions emerged. New protocols established joint investigation teams, shared information more freely, and eliminated jurisdictional disputes that had previously hindered cooperation. The case also prompted psychological analysis of why intelligence officers betray their country. Studies conducted after Ames's arrest identified common factors: financial pressure, personal narcissism, resentment toward the organization, and opportunity. The CIA implemented enhanced psychological screening for officers with access to sensitive information, attempting to identify risk factors before officers were placed in positions where betrayal could cause catastrophic damage. But the fundamental challenge remains unsolved. Intelligence agencies must trust officers with sensitive information to do their jobs. That trust creates vulnerability. Technological monitoring can identify suspicious behavior, but it cannot prevent an officer from deciding to betray that trust. The human element remains the greatest weakness in intelligence security. Ames himself offered limited insight into his motivations during debriefings. He acknowledged that his actions caused deaths and destroyed operations, but he showed little genuine remorse. His primary concern during interrogations was negotiating a favorable plea agreement, not addressing the moral implications of his betrayal. Psychologists who evaluated him described a narcissistic personality, someone who believed he was smarter than his colleagues and deserved the lifestyle his espionage enabled. The officers whose identities Ames betrayed paid the ultimate price. Dmitry Polyakov, a Soviet military intelligence officer who provided invaluable information to the CIA for more than 20 years, was arrested in 1986 and executed in 1988. Polyakov had provided intelligence about Soviet military capabilities, strategic intentions, and intelligence operations that shaped American Cold War strategy. His execution eliminated one of the most valuable intelligence sources America ever recruited. Valery Martinov, a KGB officer working for the CIA, was arrested in 1985 and executed in 1987. He had provided information about KGB operations in Washington, D.C., helping the FBI identify and neutralize Soviet intelligence efforts. Sergei Maturin, another KGB officer recruited by the CIA, was arrested in 1985 and executed in 1987.
His intelligence revealed Soviet surveillance techniques and counterintelligence methods. The list continues. 10 confirmed executions directly attributable to Ames's betrayal, and additional officers who disappeared under circumstances suggesting arrest and secret execution. Each represented years of careful recruitment, relationship building, and operational support. Their deaths represented not just intelligence losses, but moral betrayals. The United States had promised protection, had assured these officers that working for the CIA would be safe, and Ames had destroyed those promises for cash. The financial aspect of Ames's betrayal remains striking. He received more than $2.7 million from Russian intelligence over 9 years. The payments were structured carefully. Cash delivered during meetings,
wire transfers to foreign bank accounts, and payments disguised as legitimate business transactions. He spent the money extravagantly. The $540,000 house in Arlington, a Jaguar sedan, luxury vacations, designer clothes for his wife. The spending was so conspicuous that colleagues noticed and commented. One CIA officer later recalled thinking that Ames must have received an inheritance or that his wife's family was wealthy. The possibility that he was being paid by a foreign intelligence service seemed implausible because such behavior would be too obvious. But that assumption reflected a failure of imagination. Ames counted on colleagues dismissing obvious explanations because they seemed too obvious. His calculation proved correct for nearly a decade. The Ames case also revealed limitations in polygraph examinations, often considered the gold standard for security screening. Ames passed multiple polygraph examinations during his espionage activities, including examinations specifically designed to detect unauthorized disclosure of classified information.
His ability to defeat polygraph screening raised questions about the reliability of the technology and prompted research into countermeasures subjects use to produce false negative results. Some experts argue that polygraphs detect anxiety rather than deception, and that experienced intelligence officers can control physiological responses sufficiently to pass examinations even while lying. Others maintain that polygraphs remain useful when administered properly and when results are combined with other investigative methods. The debate continues, but the Ames case demonstrated conclusively that polygraphs alone cannot prevent espionage. The psychological toll on CIA officers who worked with Ames was significant. Colleagues who had trusted him, shared information with him, and considered him a friend learned that he had betrayed not just his country, but personal relationships. The revelation created institutional paranoia, a pervasive suspicion that eroded trust and damaged morale. Officers questioned whether colleagues could be trusted. Information sharing became more restricted. The collaborative culture necessary for effective intelligence work suffered. The CIA implemented counseling programs for officers affected by the betrayal, but the damage to organizational culture persisted. Some officers left the agency, disillusioned by the failure to detect Ames' activities earlier. Others became more cautious, more suspicious, less willing to take the operational risks necessary for intelligence collection. The legacy of betrayal extended far beyond the specific operations Ames compromised. The case also damaged CIA's relationship with foreign intelligence services. Allied agencies that had shared information with the CIA discovered that some of that information had been compromised through Ames's betrayal. Trust between intelligence services, already fragile, deteriorated further. Some foreign services reduced information sharing with the CIA, implementing stricter protocols and limiting the scope of cooperation. Rebuilding those relationships required years of effort and tangible demonstrations that American counterintelligence capabilities had improved.
For Russian intelligence, Ames was a spectacular success. The information he provided allowed the KGB and its successor services to neutralize American intelligence collection efforts, to protect Russian secrets, and to eliminate threats posed by officers working for the CIA. The relatively modest investment, less than $3 million over 9 years, yielded returns impossible to quantify. The strategic advantage gained from knowing American intelligence capabilities and operations provided Russia with leverage in diplomatic negotiations, military planning, and intelligence operations. Some Russian intelligence officers who interacted with Ames have spoken publicly about the operation, describing it as one of the most successful penetrations of American intelligence in history. They portrayed Ames as a professional who provided reliable information, operated securely, and remained productive for nearly a decade. From their perspective, his eventual arrest resulted from external factors, defector information, rather than operational failures on his part. The Ames case became a cautionary tale taught in intelligence training programs worldwide. The operational lessons are clear. Financial monitoring is essential.
Officers living beyond their means require investigation. Polygraph examinations alone are insufficient. Behavioral indicators, spending patterns, operational anomalies, must be considered in combination. Counterintelligence requires constant vigilance, institutional commitment, and a willingness to investigate colleagues despite personal and organizational discomfort. But the case also raised broader questions about intelligence culture. Why did the CIA tolerate mediocre performance from Ames throughout his career? Why were his obvious financial problems not investigated earlier? Why did colleagues who noticed his extravagant spending not report their concerns? The answers reveal institutional failures beyond individual betrayal. The CIA's culture prioritized operational success over security concerns.
Officers were measured by recruitment success and intelligence production, not adherence to security protocols. Mediocre performers were tolerated if they didn't cause immediate problems. Financial monitoring was inadequate because resources were focused on operations rather than internal security. The Ames case forced institutional reckoning with these failures. The reforms implemented after his arrest represented recognition that security must be integrated into organizational culture, not treated as separate function. Officers must understand that counterintelligence is everyone's responsibility, that suspicious behavior must be reported, and that protecting sensitive information requires constant vigilance. The human cost of Ames's betrayal extends beyond the officers executed. Their families suffered. Spouses were interrogated, children ostracized, lives destroyed by association with executed traitors. The CIA could not acknowledge these officers publicly, could not explain that they had died helping America, could not provide comfort to families who deserved recognition for their loved ones' sacrifices. The secrecy necessary for intelligence work meant these losses remained hidden, honored only within classified memorial ceremonies at CIA headquarters. Ames's life in prison is unremarkable. He is incarcerated in a medium security facility, living among other federal prisoners serving long sentences. He has limited contact with the outside world, monitored phone calls with his son from his first marriage, and occasional visits from lawyers. He has given interviews over the years, speaking with journalists and authors about his espionage activities. In these interviews, he expressed minimal remorse. He acknowledged that his actions caused harm, but maintained that intelligence work inherently involves moral compromises.
He argued that the CIA's operations against Soviet intelligence were also morally questionable, creating equivalencies between his betrayal and legitimate intelligence collection. The rationalization revealed continued narcissism, an inability to accept responsibility for the unique harm his actions caused. His attempts to justify betrayal as morally equivalent to intelligence work reflect cognitive distortions common among convicted spies. They frame their actions as principled rather than criminal, as equivalent to the activities they betrayed rather than uniquely harmful. The rationalization helps them maintain self-image despite overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing. The question remains whether Ames could happen again. The security reforms implemented after his arrest make similar betrayals more difficult. Financial monitoring is more rigorous, access to sensitive information is more restricted, counterintelligence receives greater resources. But human nature remains unchanged. Officers still face financial pressures. Narcissistic personalities still seek positions of trust. The opportunity for betrayal still exists for those willing to accept the moral cost. Modern technology creates new vulnerabilities. Digital information is easier to steal than physical documents. Copying classified materials to portable storage devices takes seconds. Transmitting information to foreign intelligence services can occur through encrypted communications that are difficult to detect. The same technology that enables intelligence collection also enables espionage. Intelligence agencies respond with technical countermeasures, monitoring network access, restricting portable storage devices, and analyzing usage patterns for anomalies. But determined insiders with legitimate access can still circumvent controls. The fundamental challenge persists. Organizations must trust employees to do their jobs, and that trust creates vulnerability.
The legacy of Aldrich Ames endures as a warning. Intelligence organizations are only as secure as their least loyal officer. Betrayal is possible regardless of screening, monitoring, and security protocols. The human element remains unpredictable.
capable of extraordinary service or catastrophic betrayal. The difference often comes down to choices individuals make when facing personal pressures, moral tests, and opportunities to betray trust for personal gain. Ames made his choice in April 1985 when he walked into the Soviet embassy. The consequences of that choice: executed Soviet officers, destroyed intelligence networks, damaged institutional trust, continue reverberating decades later. His story is not just about one man's betrayal, but about institutional vulnerabilities, the limits of security measures, and the profound damage that single individuals can inflict when they choose personal gain over loyalty. If this investigation into espionage, betrayal, and the hunt for moles captivated you, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss when we uncover the operations that shaped intelligence history. Drop a like if you appreciate the depth of research behind these stories. And here's your question for the comments. Could modern security technology prevent another Aldrich Ames, or will human nature always create vulnerabilities that no amount of monitoring can eliminate? Let's debate that in the comments.